All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. Now, as we are getting down to the nitty gritty, how is the race in the college football playoff shaping up? For me, still, Georgia is my number one team. The Dogs are the team to beat in that race. And as long as they don't slip up this Saturday against Charleston Southern or next Saturday against Georgia Tech, they're going to head into the SEC championship game undefeated. And regardless of what happens in Atlanta, the Bulldogs are going to be headed for the college football playoffs should they get to that championship game with an unblemished record. And I highly doubt that Georgia loses between now and then. Number two for me is Alabama. The Tide, they're back on track following their tough loss to Texas A&M. They had a tough game a couple of weeks ago versus LSU. They had a laugher this past weekend against New Mexico State. They still have some work ahead of them, of course. They have Arkansas this Saturday, and Arkansas has been less than an easy out, to say the least, for their opponents this year. So the Tide have to be ready to play that game. Of course, you have the Iron Bowl against Auburn to finish the regular season. Obviously, things change now that Bo Nix, Auburn's junior quarterback, is out for the rest of the season. So the Tide should have an easier road in that contest, but then you still have the matchup with Georgia in the SEC championship game. And unlike Georgia, Alabama cannot afford to lose that game because if they lose to the Dogs in Atlanta, they are done. For number three, for me, it's going to be Oregon. And if Oregon wins out and wins the Pac 12 championship, they're in. But Saturday's game against Utah is going to be a very tough one at Rice Eccles Stadium in Salt Lake City. Number four, I'm going with Ohio State. The Buckeyes, they're rolling. And, I keep saying this. They started off slow, which I expected, and Ohio State has done that in years past. Of course, this time around with a redshirt freshman at quarterback and CJ Stroud. But, they have their work cut out for them this Saturday at home when they host Michigan State. And then on top of that, next Saturday, they're going to be at the Big House in Ann Arbor to take on Michigan. That's just to get to the Big Ten championship game because none of these teams have clinched the Big Ten East yet. But of course, Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State still have an opportunity to get to Indy for the first Saturday in December. So those are my four teams for me that definitely are in the mix. I know that last week Cincinnati was number 5 in the college football rankings polls. But for me this week, I'm going to go with Michigan at number 5. The Wolverines got a tough win in Happy Valley on Saturday. And don't get me wrong, Penn State has lost 4 games this year. But you look at 3 of those losses. They lost on the road at Iowa, and of course, their starting quarterback was injured in that game. They lost at Ohio State, and they gave Ohio State a very tough game. And then, of course, this past Saturday against Michigan. And I can't harp on it enough. Happy Valley is a very tough place to win. So you have to give Michigan credit for that. On top of that, should Michigan win out and win the Big Ten, you have to give them a spot in the college football playoff. No ifs, ands, or buts. For me, Cincinnati is number 6. But you have to ask yourself, is the pressure getting to Cincinnati? I know that they beat South Florida on Friday night by 17 points, but Cincinnati just hasn't looked sharp like they were earlier in the season. And don't get me wrong, the college football season is a long grind. Then on top of that, with these conference games rather, it's a situation. Conference foes are always very difficult, and then everybody wants to try to knock you off right now. The Bearcats still have plenty of work ahead of them. They have to deal with a tough SMU team this Saturday, as well as potentially getting to the American Conference Championship game. So, I mean, Cincinnati still has their work cut out for them, but the opportunity is still there for them to reach the Field of Four. For me at number 7, I'm going to go with Michigan State. And after the upset loss on the road to Purdue, Michigan State bounced back at home this past Saturday against Maryland. But the Spartans, they still have their work cut out for them, just like everybody else in the Big Ten East that has a shot at this. They got to go to Columbus and beat beat Ohio State, excuse me, on Saturday. Then they'll have to deal with Penn State after that, and that's not a game that you could just pencil in as a victory if you're the Spartans. Should you get past Ohio State on Saturday, and they still got to win the Big Ten, so we'll wait and see what happens there. For me at number 8, I'm going to go Oklahoma State, and the Cowboys, believe it or not, they're doing it defensively this year. When you think about Oklahoma State under Mike Gundy, you think about them spreading the football around, throwing it all around, scoring 50 points a game in the Big 12. That's not the case this year. Cowboys are doing it defensively, and they're also running the ball. They have a very compelling story. You look at the three teams that are still in the mix to win the Big 12: Baylor, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. Now, Oklahoma State's already beaten Baylor, but there's a possibility that for Oklahoma State to win the Big 12, they'll have to beat Oklahoma twice. And I know that the Sooners took their first loss of the season last Saturday at Baylor, but nonetheless, you still cannot write off the potential of knocking off Oklahoma if you're Oklahoma State. And then, of course, the Cowboys making their case to get to the college football playoff. At 9, I'm going to go Notre Dame. And, the Irish, they're right in this one loss bunch, but not having a conference championship game is going to hurt them. They've taken a step back because they did lose to Cincinnati, who was ahead of them. And then on top of that, Notre Dame finishes up with Georgia Tech and Stanford, a combined 6 wins between both of them. So that's really not going to help Notre Dame's case as they look to leapfrog some of these teams here in the final weeks of the regular season. And then for me, finally rounding out my top 10, I'm going to go Wake Forest. The Demon Deacons, they still have a shot. But Saturday's game against Clemson, and it's a road game, is going to be a huge test. I know that this is a down year for Clemson, but the bottom line is if you're Wake Forest, you have to be up for this challenge. Defensively, you've given up a lot of points in the last couple of weeks. 58 a couple of weeks ago to North Carolina, and then 42 last Saturday to NC State in a win. So it's a situation where Clemson has struggled all year long the offensive side of the ball, but they put up 44 on a bad UConn team this past Saturday. And you hope, if you're Wake Forest, that Clemson just didn't figure it out, because if that's the case, they could knock you out of the mix. But should Wake Forest get past that game, they still have to worry about a team like Pitt in the ACC championship game. So it's going to be tough for the Demon Deacons not only to win out, but also to overcome all of those teams. So, with it all said and done, who has the best chance to win? I think Georgia is a lock at this point. Make no mistake about it. The thing is, I think the Big Ten Conference is a lock. I'm not saying that it's going to be Ohio State yet per se, but obviously they're sitting in that position. But again, you can't count out Michigan or Michigan State. The Pac-12, I don't think the Pac-12 gets in because I don't think Oregon wins the rest of their games, because you're looking at it, big time possibility that Oregon might have to face Utah 2 times. So if Oregon can beat Utah twice, or Utah and Arizona State potentially in that conference championship game, then they definitely deserve a spot there. Uh, but I think it's going to be tough. You look at Ohio State. I talked about the Big Ten. Cincinnati, they've got their work cut out for them as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see Oklahoma State kind of creep up into this thing, because some of these teams are going to beat up on each other, especially the Big Ten schools and the SEC schools. And if you're a team like Oklahoma State, if you handle your business, you've got a very good shot to go out there and make this happen. But for me, two things that a lot of these schools are looking at. They're looking at, number one, can Georgia take care of Alabama potentially in the SEC championship game? Because if Alabama wins, you're going to get into SEC teams. Make no mistake about it. And the other wild card in this scenario is Cincinnati, because if Cincinnati loses, obviously they're out. And that's going to open up a lot of things for some of these other Power Five schools. But I will say this, though: if Alabama wins the SEC, and obviously that means they would have beaten Georgia, I guarantee you it's only going to enhance the discussion in regards to expansion for the college football playoff. And don't get me wrong, this was talked about initially for the college football playoff several years ago, that there was going to be a possibility of two SEC teams getting in. We saw it a couple of years ago when Georgia and Alabama played for the national championship, and there's a possibility that it happens again. But the talks about expansion are ramping up, and with that said, I think these other Power Five conferences are going to be very disappointed, even though it would be the right thing to do. But nonetheless, I think they're going to be very disappointed to see two SEC teams make the Field of Four again. But with that said, there's plenty, and I mean plenty, of intrigue coming up for the next couple of Saturdays. It all starts with this Saturday. We've got some big ones that's led by Michigan State and Ohio State getting it on at the Horseshoe. But nonetheless, we're getting close to the finish line, and we're going to find out sooner rather than later who's going to be in that Field of Four for the college football playoff. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take the time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.